Amazon Procurement Women are back. We are recording on a Sunday. It's a little dreary and kind of gross in Danville. Not raining yet, but our sunshine has gone away for the weekend.
Yeah, it's kind of the same here in Oakland, and it was gorgeous the last couple of days. It was like 64, 65, and sunny, and just beautiful spring weather in the middle of winter. So beautiful, but I'm not sure that's good in a macro sense.
Mhm. So today we're going to talk about something that's a little more core and foundational. I would call it a little bit more basic, but I think it's really important and worth highlighting, especially with the new administration coming in and how this is driving some fundamental changes with how organizations are looking at procurement, structuring procurement, and measuring metrics and performance from procurement. So, we are going to talk about the state of cost savings today. Now, some of you may be cringing and thinking, oh, this, every single year we have to talk about this and hear this, but whether or not we like it, cost savings is really, really important and matters a lot. And I think we're going to see it mattering even more in 2025. So I'll start off, Dr. Elouise. I took some notes just from conversations and some of the things that I've read and encountered over the last, I would say, 3 months. I think fundamentally, cost savings is more important than people want to admit. I mentioned that in the call out. I want to double down on that. It's really important. And I think companies have realized that when they focused on other projects, things like digital transformation, DEI, ESG, AI, et cetera, they were all good initiatives, but you still need to incorporate and have a focus on cost savings. It's kind of been, I guess you call it the redheaded stepchild over the past several years. And companies have realized that they were remiss, and I think realized that they made a mistake for de-emphasizing it. So I think we're seeing it come back full circle and be a really big priority for organizations this year. With the uncertainty in the US with the new administration, things are kind of still shaping up and we're figuring out where things are going to land. I think and the impact that it's going to have on the economy, I think cost savings is again going to be a huge priority driven by the new government administration. And in conversations that I'm having with practitioners in all size organizations, they are saying again, it's going to be a top priority. And if an organization had halted or deprioritized it, it's now being moved to the top of the list again.
Yeah, and I would just interject there that this is pretty common when there is tumultuousness in the world, or even for a particular organization. First thing up is procurement is let's get some cost savings now, and I've seen that every year that I've been doing procurement, which is almost 25 years now. So that is, you can set your watch to that.
And I would say that if you are a practitioner, you already know this, but it's a good reminder. You have got to figure out a way to come up with a metric that is meaningful and impactful to leadership that you can tie to cost savings in all of your initiatives. So again, if you're doing an AI initiative, great, and you've got the foundation built in to drive cost savings by removing bodies, by automating, by removing redundancies, but you've got to have a metric that you can actually track and measure that the CFO and the leadership team will actually believe and care about. So figure out however it is that you need to do that within your organization, but make that a big priority. One of the other things, we kind of talked about this in our episode a couple weeks ago, but I want to circle back to it in this conversation around cost savings, is the amount of companies that I have heard that are abandoning their DEI and ESG programs is actually pretty astounding. Like they're literally dropping, getting rid of, collapsing the programs completely. And I think a big part of this and a big reason is that procurement teams at these companies see cost savings as the safe priority. It's the thing that we want to focus on and we should be focusing on versus initiatives like DEI and ESG, which are harder to tie back to cost savings and harder to tie back to value that leadership cares about.
Yeah, I mean, also it's, I mean, I've been surprised at how quickly DEI has become a three-letter curse word, for lack of a better term. And the speed at which companies are just kicking it to the curb is shocking. And I'm not taking a side one way or another at this point. It's just the fact that like there's these lists and there's actually influencers bring like activist influencers, which is different than activist investors, that are taking companies' DEI positions and clubbing them over the head with it publicly or threatening to. And so that, in addition to what the administration's done. So I think DEI just completely is getting collapsed. Shout out to Costco for holding steady. I don't know how that's going to, I think that's a whole different issue. But the thing that I find it interesting is ESG and sort of the sustainability part of that. Because, and again, I work a lot in with European companies, and the discourse over there is really all in on climate, and over here it's I mean, we don't believe in climate change, and we can't be talking about it. There's all these sort of things. So in some ways, I would say you're 100% right. The cost savings is easy, and we can just do that, and maybe cost savings plus risk because with all the stuff. But there's no doubt that like it is all about cost savings right now, and it just so pains me to say that. Now, I just want to flag one other thing. When you're talking about metrics, there's okay, we pay $100 per unit today, and if we pay $90 per unit tomorrow, we've saved $10 a unit. But I think all,
Which I would argue is easier to do on the direct side
yeah,
because they've got systems and processes to manage things like that. I would say that's much harder to do on the indirect side.
yes. Although on that point, I would say again, I think we talked about this. There's a little bit of a shell game going when you have a new product come in and you architect in, those cost savings before you even produce the product. So there's a little. I'm not sure it actually improves the bottom line. It shows quote unquote progress or savings. But you're right. On the indirect, it's hard to really track that. Although I will say, like when you look at these companies like Green Cabbage and Vendor and the others that do benchmarking on say software, like $100 a Microsoft license or whatever it is versus $90, and pretty much everybody pays the same thing. So it is you can get it in some areas, but others it's hard. But what I want to flag is also in some of these areas, the cost avoidance is really the tricky one because that's where we can create value now. The problem is it's hard to track that money to the bottom line.
Yeah, it's very, very hard to do. It's like the what if scenario. What if something gets hijacked? What if this happens in 6 months? What if this happens in 12 months? And I've seen in my career leaders be more open to that if they've had a disaster or some
Mhm.
big blow up that they've lived through. If not, I think the what if scenario is harder to get buy in from leadership.
And I will come back to sort of how we deal with this, but I mean, speaking of what ifs, I mean, there are things happening now. I mean, just this morning, the current president just slapped a 25% tariff on Colombia for for unexpected reasons, shall we say? And that will likely go up to 50%. So all of a sudden now, trading with Colombia has just gotten disrupted. I think is a fair way to say that. And that's not even something that was planned. So when tariffs become this de facto reactionary tool, that's going to send shockwaves, I think, through the markets, because this is just, I mean, I don't think anybody had Colombia as the first place that was going to get tariffed. So I really genuinely think that we are going to be in for a bumpy ride, and maybe Colombian imports exports is not going to disrupt most American businesses, but goodness, I mean, it could be a big harbinger of what's to come.
Mhm. So the other thing I'll highlight, and then I want to talk a little bit about risk because you mentioned that earlier, and how that potentially ties into the whole cost savings equation. But I think what I'm seeing a lot in the market now, as we're getting into this new year again with this kind of double down focus on cost savings, is also a restructuring of procurement teams. So not only shift in focus, but a whole reorg, new titles, potentially different talent, or people kind of pivoting internally, so they can set up for more quantifiable value, or
Hmm.
really focusing on that cost savings piece. And I think we're seeing a lot of the cost savings focus come in the IT space. It's
Hmm.
almost like the sharp tunnel vision of IT procurement, IT sourcing focus, particularly around SaaS, with
Yeah.
the goal to not only reduce cost, but also, as you mentioned earlier, manage the risk component. So I think you're going to see more procurement teams reorg and restructure in the first half of this year, with the shift on quantifiable value that ties back to cost savings.
Yeah, and I will get on my soapbox here. Let me just step up on it, and really talk about, this is where I agree with you. Not only are we restructuring, and likely, well, certainly the whole organization has to change as we bring more agents into the workforce, or these AI agents. And I really genuinely believe, and I am screaming it from the mountaintops, that a lot of these cost saving activities will be augmented, if not driven, largely by this agentic workforce, because we have a lot of experience with cost savings and cost savings activities, and many of them are well documented, and sort of activities that agents can do really well, and they can learn, and they could probably do better than humans in many situations. So as we restructure, as we reorg, and if agents are sort of that core and digital investment area, I think that adds further change to what you're describing. And there's no doubt in my mind that we are headed for that.
Well, yeah, as part of that reorg, you're going to have even junior level people potentially on your team managing AI agents.
Right.
So
And that's
everyone becomes a manager.
right. Yes, and that's the I got that phrase somewhere on my whiteboard. Every employee a manager, and that's what I've been saying, because I, whether I have one agent or 20 agents, like, what my productivity should go through the roof. And by the way, it should improve my life. I don't want to ever have to open another Excel file or PowerPoint, or heaven forbid, log into SAP.
Or
I
can
mean,
somebody manage all my emails for me and sort and organize and help draft my responses?
exactly, exactly.
So I want to circle back to the risk comment that you made, and kind of how you see that fitting into cost savings this year with organizations, and if you've seen anything innovative from a risk mitigation or risk management perspective that's worth sharing.
Well, I think at this point, everybody knows that I'm pretty skeptical of the risks
Yeah.
management uh, part of our profession. It's not that we've done anything wrong. We just haven't matured to the level that we need to. So cost savings, very mature, very clear, well-defined. Risk management, just a complete free for all. And much of, as I have written, much of what we do as quote unquote risk management is really risk theater. So one of my hopes is that as we reorg and add more agents to the mix, we actually can deploy large numbers of agents to help bolster our third-party risk management. And so I'm very bullish on this and very excited for it. And this gets to uncertain times, shall we say? And it, I think I think we've been in uncertain times, and those I think are going to accelerate, or there's accelerant added to those uncertain times right now. And so, what can we do to prepare? Is a understanding. Essentially, I'll shortcut it. Have good master data on our products, on our materials, on our suppliers, and everything else to run the business. If we learned anything from 2016 to 2020, is that change can happen fast, and we better be prepared. And so if something gets tariffed, we better know what the impact is today instantaneously and look at our options. And so to me, part of risk management is in advance of said risk or said disruption, understanding, do we have inventory stock? Do we have alternate suppliers in different locations? Do we know what parts of what products are going to be affected by any given action or trade action or legislative action? And then more importantly, let's say everything's great right now. Everything's perfect. We're not disruptive. Well, we should be then working ahead and planning ahead and doing scenario planning, like you said, and really thinking about, okay, well, everything's concentrated. We moved it out of China. We put it into Vietnam. Well, is there a chance that that's not quite the right strategy? And so we should be working 3-4 years in advance on mitigating those risks. And we're just maturity wise not there.
Well, and I want to throw in, now that I'm in IT, I want to put my IT hat on. I would argue the largest risk right now for organizations is cybersecurity.
Undoubtedly.
Cyber threats. So there's the risk associated with a manufacturing company, for example, that's actually physically manufacturing a product, making sure your parts and materials arrive on time and don't have any issues. But you also have the massive amounts of people that have access to the internet and are trying to attack organizations through the network. So I think there's a really important risk play from the cybersecurity place. And then circling that back to cost savings, how do you prevent and prepare for that? Because you can't control what you don't know exists. So that's kind of a full loop circle that we've got to think about.
Well, and then to put my procurement hat on and anchor what you just said back to procurement, the greatest risk to the enterprise is cybersecurity, but it's, I would argue, through the third parties. Because if we have 55,000 third parties hitting our systems, we're not managing that. We don't know what's going on with that. So even if they only have access to your ERP or your P2P systems, like that is a huge, huge, huge security risk. And the fact that we are so laissez-faire about having tens of thousands of suppliers. I have clients with 100,000 suppliers and one with 200,000 suppliers. Like that should send alarm bells. And by the way, when I am critical, and I am highly critical of CIOs, you like the fact that CIOs aren't in front of this problem just drives me absolutely bananas. And so it's fallen to the CPO and even more broadly supply chain leaders to get ahead of this. And I actually think we're trying and we're making good progress. And in 5 years, I expect we'll be sort of on par with this. But tisk to the CIOs, because they have fallen down on their job on this.
Well, and I would say the CIOs that I speak to, I would say that all of them have said their top 3 priorities for 2025 is cybersecurity. So I think it depends on the organization and it depends on who it is, but it should be a huge focus and priority for CIOs and IT. And now procurement plays a part in that. because they're helping with sourcing and procurement and ensuring that the stakeholders are following processes and working with certain suppliers. But yes, I do think huge call out there that it's going to be even a bigger concern and a bigger issue. I think with just the layoffs and the crazy state of the world.
Yeah, but just saying it's one of your top three priorities is not good enough. I
Yeah,
want
what is the action? What are
right,
you doing
exactly.
to solve it?
Okay, so everybody inside the organization takes cybersecurity awareness training, quote unquote, because we all know that doesn't work. But even if that did work, and okay, you've locked the laptops down, okay, fine, we secured the networks. That's like 2% of the job of that or of that objective. The other 98% is what are all these tens of thousands of suppliers doing when they hit your system, and who is managing that? And the answers are not good answers. They're not, or at least they're not secure. So hey, kudos that cybersecurity is on your top three things for 2025, but look in the right place.
I would also add to your list consultants can
Oh,
be a big
yes.
risk. So you mentioned you have clients with 100,000 suppliers. There are several organizations that I've worked with that have a very large group of consultants or non full-time employees. That's a huge risk. And I would also argue employees are a huge risk because they're getting massive amounts of emails. They click on something or get a phone call and give out a password, and there goes your massive data breach. So I think looking internally as well is important.
Yeah, and so this, and I wrote about this in my book, is we cannot rely on humans to be the first, middle, and last line of defense. And humans should be the last. I talk about these concentric circles of risk, or building these layers of risk protection. Look at any AP sort of function within the enterprise. It's almost all people. And we should have several layers of filters of digital sort of tools and intelligence that really filters out so much of what comes to those clerks, because we're putting a lot of responsibility onto humans. And yes, everybody might be doing their job perfectly today, but as you said, I mean that is a huge risk factor. And where was the article? Google and Meta have paid millions of dollars for bogus invoices. I have to look up where that I bookmarked it. But I mean, because again, we're just asking humans to do all the validation verification, and they're getting inundated with emails. And yeah, so I'm with you 100%.
So as it ties to cost savings, keep cybersecurity in mind and a huge priority, because something happens with an attack, there goes your cost savings for the next 5 years.
Exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
you gotta get that under control.
Yeah.
Dr. Elouise, anything else that you're seeing from clients this year from a cost saving perspective that's kind of like an aha or standing out, other than kind of just the normal status quo that we're used to seeing?
Well, something I saw last year, which and it, as a historian, I always find this interesting, is I've seen a lot more sophisticated use of game theory and really bringing in these really sophisticated. There's like negotiation strategies. Shout out to our friend of the show, Mark Ruffin, and the work that he does, but also like there's this whole other layer where you're taking these really advanced mathematical, theoretical concepts like game theory and applying them to negotiations for these massive contracts that companies get into. And I understand game theory, but I have never applied it to a negotiation, so I'm the wrong person. But that there are companies now. I think Namu is one of them, and there's a couple others that are really doing this next level. And I say it as I don't even understand. So but I've noticed that has come about maybe the last couple of years, and I see more quote unquote game theory. Again, somebody can tell us if that's actually pretend game theory or real game theory, but regardless, I find that it's an interesting trend, and that and automation, as I talked about, sort of with the agents. Those are the two sort of like not business as usual trends that I've seen.
So interesting that you mentioned game theory. A friend of mine named Zoe Pangalos, I think I've seen her speak now 4 times. Her whole world is game theory.
Yeah,
So she
nice.
does consulting, and she'll come in and help organizations set up programs, and she'll often be brought in when it's a very, very large negotiation to help with the whole game theory. And according to her, she also is noticing there's been a big uptick in the last couple of years of companies kind of being more interested in that model. And one of the presentations she did was with a customer that she worked with on a pretty major opportunity. And it appeared that they were pretty happy with the results. I've not personally either been involved using it myself, but I have seen, again, her speak multiple times at different events because it seems to be kind of a top of mind or interesting topic for folks.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, anything else cost savings focused that we want to highlight or talk about? Again, I think it's going to be a massive focus and priority this year. I think folks need to figure out how to track it, how to measure it, get your organization realigned, and make sure you get leadership, executive leadership, and also figure out how to optimize the investments you've made in ProcureTech and technology to help with those initiatives. I think that's an important thing to factor in as well.
And I think the one other thing is building on that is complexity reduction. And now that we have these really sophisticated analysis tools, intelligence tools, dare I say AI tools, doing complexity reduction and looking at the totality of what we buy, where we buy, who we buy, and what their capabilities are, we're going to have the regular end user is going to have access to that. Maybe not in, what are we, January 2025, maybe not in February 2025, but I think a year from now, if we were to circle back or bookmark this and come back to it, the fact that regular end users without massive knowledge could query all of these data sets to look for consolidation opportunities or complexity reduction opportunities. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and that will drive cost savings and improve risk over the long haul. Now, a lot of these things, and some of these things are definitely much more on the direct side, but I think if you fast forward 5-10 years, these are sort of really key things that can move the needle on cost savings and risk.
And to be fair, we've been working on this kind of like at least 15, if not 20 years.
Consultants have been doing this, but I want to see it become just on my desktop with an agent that I can just start to look at that. And I think that is almost here. And that's going to be a big breakthrough for these two topics.
Yeah. And in my world, in the IT asset management space, visibility is a huge focus and priority for folks, no matter what business unit you're associated with. And we're seeing more conversations and more folks wanting to have visibility of all of their physical and digital investments so they can really get good, clean data to understand usage and make better decisions. So I think, to double down on your point, I think giving your employees and internal stakeholders the ability to have access to that data and be able to trust the data, we'll see better decisions being made around purchases, right? Forecasting what to buy, when to buy, do we need to buy this? So those that are listening and following us on YouTube, if you have any major shout outs or call outs or things you're noticing from a cost savings perspective, make sure to drop us a note in the comments. We do read all the comments and appreciate the input. And so we'll circle back to some of the suggestions or input during the show. With that, we will, I think, sign off for the week and see you next Wednesday.